What does medieval mean? It is to do with European history. It means middle age. It's Latin. Medium, middle, aevum, age. Note the spelling of aevum. A-E-V-U-M, pronounced even, like the A-E in Caesar. And when you put the two words together, you use half of medium and half of aevum, with a couple of letters on the end, A-L, to make it an adjective, and you have medieval. When you pronounce it, you keep the I of medium. So you don't say medieval, you say medieval. Well, that clears up the spelling and the pronunciation. Now, why the Latin? Because Latin was the language of the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire collapsed, the Latin language continued for two reasons. One, the Catholic Church survived the destruction, and the language of the Church was Latin. And two, Latin was the language of scholars. It was the only worthwhile language there was at the time. The barbarians who invaded the empire were not great fans of writing or scholarship. So for scholars, Latin was the only practical choice. Moreover, it was international. Men of learning anywhere, from Hadrian's Wall to the Persian Gulf, could exchange knowledge in one language and be understood. So of course they used it. This continued for the best part of another 1,000 years after the end of the empire, until native languages like English and French, Spanish, Italian, German and so on gradually took over in everyday speech and writing. But Latin survives to this day in the worlds of medicine, botany and the law. Anyway, you now know what medieval means. But why do we need such a word anyway to describe a middle age? Or as it became more commonly known, the Middle Ages. Middle of what? In effect, by answering the question, what does medieval mean? We have only raised another one. What were the Middle Ages? So, here we go again. In situations like this, it pays to stand back. Don't get tangled up with the trees while you're looking for the wood. Put another way, think simple. Along the lines of why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? If there is a middle, there must be a front end and a back end. Yes, there was. There always is. But getting a handle on it was not as straightforward then. During those 1,000 years, it was so hard that most men had their time taken up with surviving the present, never mind thinking about the past, much less the immediate future. The barbarian invasions had destroyed so much in the way of scholarship and records that there was not a great deal to go on. In many cases, not much more than human memory, simple observation, and imagination. In any case, the Catholic Church had already done it for them. They had sorted out the whole world. Well, the whole world that everybody knew about. At that time, the world, such as it was Europe and the Near East, what men called Christendom, not any of the other continents. The Catholic Church ran the show. It was everywhere. It was as much part of people's lives as the air they breathed. The word Catholic meant universal. It was from ancient Greek this time, not Latin. In more literal detail, it meant concerning all. Kata, meaning concerning, holos, meaning all. We get our word whole from it. In effect, the church told people all they needed to know about the world and its history, or rather, all that the church thought they needed to know. The Catholic Church said that the world was created by God, and God had created the church to run it, and wouldn't let the church do anything wrong. So we're safe. And all this is true because the church said so, which tied it up rather neatly. Unfortunately, times were changing, as times have an awkward habit of doing. In the 16th century, the Catholic Church's grip began to slip. Long story, maybe some other time. The Reformation, the Protestant Church, helped men to wriggle out of the Catholic straitjacket. Men who now thought for themselves were in for a surprise. Perhaps Jesus Christ was not the beginning of virtue. Perhaps some worthwhile things had happened before the birth of Christ. Whoever these historians were, however faithful or skeptical, when they came to study and try to make sense of the past, probably the biggest single thing to strike them was classical civilization, Greece and Rome. It was unmissable and unavoidable, and it came before Christ. Evidence of it was everywhere. Cities, temples, roads, bridges, aqueducts, even sewers. It had most certainly happened. And it was so full of wonders and mysteries, the work of supermen. Greece and Rome made medieval men feel like poor relations. What could mere mortals in this vale of tears do about it? In the centuries following the collapse of the Roman Empire, men spent a lot of time trying to make sense of it, to recover its lost learning, to recreate its magic. Anyway, yes, we knew about Greece and Rome, and we gained a glimmering of other empires too, and we knew they were definitely old, and that they weren't there anymore. So it seemed logical and natural to call it ancient history. We knew hardly anything about it, but we could at least give it a name and admire it. Historians in this Reformation period, rejoicing in their freedom from the stranglehold of the papacy, were tickled to death with their discovery of the ancient world. It became a sort of craze. They called it the rebirth of learning, excuse me, the Renaissance. Inevitably, they thought that their period of history, the ones they lived in, was enlightened and right and knew where it was going. So, of course, it became modern history. That meant that a huge gap yawned between the end of ancient history and the beginning of their modern history. Give or take a century or two, they knew they were talking about 1,000 years. Debate still smoulders about that give or take a century or two. At any rate, the historians now had a back end, up to the end of Rome, ancient history, and they had a front end, roughly the 16th century onwards, modern history. So it seemed logical, if not very imaginative, to think up a name to do with the idea of middle. And as scholars still use Latin as the language of learning, they use Latin words for it, medieval. Latin is not universal now, not even common knowledge, so we say Middle Ages. Oddly, we don't say the Middle Age, we say the Middle Ages, plural. Curious.